Speaking of all these other handhelds, like we've got these. Some of them aren't. Some of them are handhelds, but are they really handhelds? Like that's a question that I think that we need to ask. Like I watched your video, Russ, about I can. The name of this thing is terrible.
Oh, it's terrible.
The TJT109. It's like the name of a Terminator or something.
Yeah, TJD is the name of the company, and then the device is called T101. And yeah, it sounds like a Terminator.
So the T101. I saw your video and I was like, okay, it looks cool or whatever. And then you got to the part of the video where you stood up and were holding it like next to you in your hand. And I was like, oh my God, that thing is ridiculous. How do you feel about that thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I knew, like, when they emailed and said, hey, we're going to send this thing, I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm going to make a ridiculous video, you know. But once I actually got it in my hands, I was like, you know, this 10 inches is not so bad. Like, it's good because you can hold it further away and still be able to, like, you know, play with it. And so it's nice to be able to, like, actually rest on your lap and then, like, kind of use it like that because it is pretty heavy. It's like 2.5 pounds. And then also, because the screen's so big, they've got room for a big battery. They've got room for big controls. And so it does feel very kind of luxurious. I just wish that, you know, kind of the build quality was better. Again, it was an engineering unit, so I can't really, like, say if it's going to get better or worse. And then also, like, the controls didn't work on mine. Like, I spent, like, 3 days trying to get it to work. But essentially, the D-pad was just constantly firing up. And so their first email said, well, just take it apart and see if you can fix it. I'm like... No, that's your job, you know.
That's right.
So I didn't even attempt that, you know, especially because it's probably made with like hot wax and stuff inside, and so I didn't want to deal with any of that stuff. And so then, and then I just turned it off within the device manager, and then it worked. And so then I ended up using everything with an external controller, which means I couldn't accurately judge the controls themselves. And so as much as I wanted to say this is a really neat experience, I couldn't. And so at that point, I was just basically playing on tablet PC. And yeah, the screen's big. It's way too big to be like portable in any way, but it was still kind of a fun experience to have something so massive.
And you had the grips too, right? Like the grips are massive.
Yeah, they're huge. They're like full size. You know, I've had like I think you guys, some of you had like the AOK Zoe products, right? They have like really massive grips on them as well. These just like completely blow those out of the water. Like it's just full console size controls on a handheld PC. It's kind of crazy.
What were you saying, Rich?
So this is even bigger than the Neo Kun, right? Is the Kun?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Kun is like 8.5 inch.
Yeah, 8.4. I got the Kun the other day, and it's tiny. I'm like, oh, look at this little guy. You know, everyone else is like, it's so big, and I'm like, oh, look at this little guy. And so
yeah,
I'll do some size comparisons on the Kun, which I'll probably review in the coming week. So.
That's great. And then the PlayStation Portal is another one, right? It's not 8.4, it's not 10 inches, but it's 8-inch screen with those big DualSense grips. So that's going to be another big one.
I think a lot of people, especially those who aren't like us, who have actually like held a bunch of these, they're going to be really surprised at that price or the size. They're going to, you know, have pre-ordered it or whatever and be like, oh yeah, it's like a little like tablet or whatever. They're going to get it and be like, oh my gosh, this is an iPad, you know? So,
well, and not only that, but the PlayStation Portal, like I would hope that it's a whole lot lighter than these other devices, so you can hold it at, like, you don't have to rest it on your lap in order to play it, because, you know, when you were talking about sitting there and having it on your lap, all I could think of is you're looking down the whole time, and it's got to, like, strain your neck after a while. Am I wrong about that, Russ?
You're right, yeah, and so that's definitely, like, you could do it on the lap, but I would rather just do it on a table. If you're going to do it on a table, then might as well use the laptop. That's kind of like where I'm at with all that, so, yeah.
That was one of the complaints for one of the early Steam Deck reviews. I think they called it Deck Neck, right? Like, I think it was Engadget, where, like, it was just, you're looking like this the whole time, and you get sore in the neck. And, you know, maybe for some people it was just harder to hold up here, or maybe they weren't used to it. But, yeah, I can't imagine with something that size, so.
Yeah.
You know what's nice about, okay, people screaming, sorry about that. There's okay. That's one of the nice things about clamshell, because you can actually have the device be ergonomic to you, rather than you be ergonomic to the device. But, you know,
who had that Carrie would have clamshell at 12 minutes 50 into the show? Who
what was
that?
The over-under for that one?
Whoever had it, you win. You win. I'm sorry, Carrie. I just had to jump in there. Go ahead.
No, that's it. That's all I wanted to say.
There was a recent Steam Deck clamshell render on Reddit, and it looked really nice. It did have sort of those like inset analog sticks that I don't really like, the really short ones. But other than that, that render was beautiful. I'll find it and I'll post it in the chat.
That's awesome. Well, you could just share it on your screen. But, we were talking about the clamshell design, and somebody had mentioned, I hate the clamshell design because of the sticks. I would love to have a clamshell where, I don't know if it's possible, but where you could just take off the stick caps and, like, have them, like, magnetically hook up to something somewhere so that when you can close it, it closes all the way, but you could still have real sticks. I think that would be awesome. Carrie, do you think that, like, do you think that's a possibility ever, or is that something that because I don't know much about sticks. Do the posts that they go on have to be too tall for that to really be an option anyway?
Sorry, say that again. You're looking to have analog sticks that are like disconnectable so that you can store them somewhere to make the device thinner?
Yeah. Like on the Xbox Elite controller, like how they can pop right off.
I mean, you could do that. I probably would be on the side that would not want that. The main problem with clamshell with analog sticks is that, as you've already highlighted, is that the height of the analog stick is going to rob you of space somewhere. So you're either going to have an alcove for the analog stick so that the screen can close properly, or you're going to have to do something like you're saying, where you can kind of take out these analog sticks and have like a caddy somewhere on the device itself, just to make a device thinner. The reality is that I don't think that it's super necessary. The GPD Win Max 2 and the GPD Win Mini show that you can have an alcove that supports that recess. And a side benefit of that is that it does make the device a certain thickness, which actually makes it more comfortable to use. Having a device be thinner, in my experience, is something that just becomes I get cramps in my hands if a device is too thin when I'm holding handhelds. So like the 3DS and the PS Vita, often whenever I play that at length, I would get cramps. I never got it with the Switch though, but I never got it with any of GPD's devices that have a thicker device. So I've always been a fan of just thicker devices in general. So it's a side benefit. It's a silver lining to it.
But I've never used one of those GPD devices. Do they have real sticks, or are they like more like the Switch sticks? Which, no offense to Nintendo Switch fans, but those are not real sticks if you ask me. They're too small.
Yeah, they are small Switch-like in terms of their travel and all other types of characteristics. They're closer to like PS Vita than Switch sticks. So if you use the PS Vita's analog stick, you can get a kind of an idea of what that's like. They're have a bit more travel than those. So they're not full analog sticks in that regard. So you will be losing out. If you wanted to go that, then you're going to have like really thick devices. Yeah. So the problem then becomes, if you wanted to have something that you were looking for, you can have like this disconnectable analog cap. You also have to remember the skirt for the analog stick itself is also going to occupy space. So now you're talking about just a cap, and that is fairly large. You're almost like an inch and a half of space. So I don't even know if that would even be very portable by disconnecting it and like storing somewhere else.
So I've been messing around with a GPD Win Mini, and one of the many handhelds that I need to be reviewing, and that one has, like Fox is saying, like it has those smaller Switch style ones. And I personally, I keep wishing that they were bigger. Like, because the thing is with that size in particular, when you push on, like say you're going up on an analog stick, it just kind of tilts. You know what I mean? It just kind of stays where it is and then tilts over. If you're using something like a bigger, like Steam Deck one or whatever, the whole thing kind of pivots. It kind of moves, right? With it, it has a more circular feel to it. And that's what I would rather have. And unfortunately, the GPD Win Mini ones are just too small. And it sucks because the GPD Win 4, which has pretty small analog sticks too, does that kind of pivot. And so that would be ideal for me, is at least having that size. But I completely understand why it's not possible with, a clamshell design. But that's one of those things, I always do like my Destiny 2 test, like how's a good FPS going to be on it? And for me, the GPD Win Mini doesn't really pass that test. Like I don't look forward to playing it on that device, which kind of sucks because it's like the perfect form factor. Just grab it, you got like a 3DS you can play Destiny 2 on, but unfortunately it just doesn't pan out, at least for me and my control like preference.
Russ, I'm trying to remember the Ioneo Qun. Does it have the right stick up high or is it down low?
It is low. But it's in a V shape. You know, they did a really good job doing the V shape with that one in particular, and so it is very comfortable. Yeah, there we go. So yeah,
I didn't know you had one, Fox.
Yeah, you got the silver one. That looks nice. And so the trackpads are way too low, as you can see. Like, you cannot play a first-person shooter with that game using trackpads like you can on the Steam Deck. So it's mostly for like Windows management. But yeah, that's the placement of everything on the Kun is really good. Like they just looked at the Steam Deck and said, "All right, what can we do without getting sued?" You know, so that's basically like the buttons. Everything is very similar.
Yeah,
and so that's a good thing. It's just it's $1,700, but
yeah, it's definitely like min-maxing the Steam Deck as it is. Like, even the back buttons that they have mimic it, the Steam Deck's back buttons. So it's pretty funny in that regard. Yeah.
So are you like you for those of you that either couldn't see it because of the way that this is going to be edited, Kerry just held up his Ioneo Kun or Qun. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce
Kun,
it.
yep.
I think it's Qun, which is like Chinese, right? For big fish. Isn't that what it's supposed to be?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's what somebody had told me. But Kerry's holding it up now. What are your thoughts on it, Kerry?
So very quickly, it's there's a lot of things that they're doing on it, and they're min-maxing in a lot of different ways. And there isn't a big benefit to trying to do it because it's like one device that they claim it does. So it took about like 4 days just to collect all the data. So I did about a 12-hour test at 54 watt on this, and I'm charting that out. And then I did every watt from 5 watt to 54 watt. Against 2 benches, which took like 5 hours each run. So I had to collect all that data and put all that in. So it's just days of testing. Overall, it's fine, right? Like, if you use an Ioneo 2 device, you basically have a super Ioneo 2. Does that really do anything for performance? Not really. Does it do anything for having a bigger screen? Yeah. But the trackpads, people are going to be left wanting a lot because they don't compare to the Steam Deck at all. Yeah. The left trackpad is you can change this in the IS space, but the left circle pad is basically the cursor keys, and then the right trackpad is effectively just a laptop touchpad. So the bottom left quadrant is left click, and the bottom right quadrant is right click, and it's not great.
Yeah. So here's my question. The first thing that popped in my head when I saw the Qun was the idea that if it's just a mouse, does Steam Input recognize it and work with the cool stuff that Steam Input can do?
No. As far as Steam is concerned, it's a mouse.
Oh, that's so disappointing. So you can't do the cool the pop-up menus and stuff with that.
I mean, I could. No, you like the radial menu and stuff. You could potentially make that happen. I mean, you could probably finagle it somewhere in Steam Input to have that happen. I would have to double check, but
it's so the Ioneo devices prior all have a similar problem with gyro, right? Steam Input doesn't recognize the gyro on the device, and so you can't really use it in Steam Input. And then so the Ioneo software has software to configure the gyro, but it's extremely limited compared to Steam Input. So like what it basically does is you hold down a button and that'll map it to analog stick movement. And what that means for me personally is that I can't use Flickstick, because Flickstick, I want the analog to be distinct from the trackpad. And so it doesn't work out for me. Or from
Rich,
the gyro,
can you just remind anybody who's watching this right now what Flickstick is? Because I think there's a lot of people who would be like, what are they talking about?
So Flickstick is an aiming method specifically for like first-person shooters, but you can use it in other genres as well, where you're moving the analog stick. You can sweep it kind of in the full 360 degrees, and the direction in which you sweep it is, flicking to the left will make you turn to the left. Flicking to the right will make you turn to the right. Same thing for sweeping. And so what that means, though, is that you don't have any access to vertical movement with the analog stick. So you need gyro to be able to move the cursor vertically.
Yeah. Uh, Anybody in here use Flick Stick? I try it, and I keep trying it, and I never get good at it. Russ is shaking his head. No, you don't like it.
No, like I have issues because I play inverted, and so like gyro just breaks my mind. Like because it's like I cannot like get it to work in the way that my brain needs it, and so I've never been able to really use gyro in any way because of that, especially with first-person shooters.
Yeah. Speaking of first-person shooters and gyro, I was playing Counter-Strike 2 this morning, trying it out. And I tried using my Alpaca controller, and I couldn't figure out how to buy guns because I don't think that there's a B button on that controller. So I was like, okay, well, that's less than optimal. So then I went and I grabbed my Steam controller because I'm not a mouse and keyboard guy. I hooked it up, or I plugged in my Steam controller. And I was like, oh, I'm going to use the default whatever, like. This is the Steam controller made by Valve, playing Counter-Strike 2, made by Valve. They had gyro turned off by default. I was like, what in the heck are you guys doing? So I turned it on, and it was fine, but that was really weird. And then I came over and tried mouse and keyboard, and I just died.
The thing is about like this whole trackpad thing and whatnot. I worry, like the Kuhn is a great example in that like this thing is so much more expensive than the Steam Deck. And if you finagle it just right, you can kind of get it to work almost as good as the Steam Deck. And it's like, what are you paying all this money for? If you're going to pay a ton of money for a device, then it should improve your gameplay experience. It should remove barriers as opposed to adding them. And so it's one of those where it's a very contradictory handheld. I can see why people will be very happy with it if they get it. But I don't know if there's a lot of people who want to go over that threshold of paying that amount of money when they can just get a Steam Deck and do all the other tinkering they'd like.
Yeah, it's 1,700, right?
That the high spec one is like the one they sent me is the $1,700 model with like 4 terabytes of storage. I'm like, why? Like, send me the cheapest one every time, please, because I cannot make an argument why this thing's worth $1,700.
What were you going to say, Carrie?
So a little inside baseball type of stuff. When the Kuhn was first coming out or being talked about with the trackpads, I actually talked with Valve for a brief moment about that, and there was some talk. I was talking with Arthur over on Ioneo and Valve, and I was like, hey, would you want to like work with Valve on this and get the trackpads working like Steam Deck trackpads? And there was like a brief time with that where Valve was interested, but they had a caveat that they didn't think that they would even want to entertain it because effectively this would be Valve's implementation. So all of the bad stuff that comes with that on the Windows side. So it'd be Lizard mode without Steam running and all the other stuff. So there was a brief moment where there was talks, but then nothing really happened. And now we have what we have.
It just makes me think that Valve need to ship SteamOS 3 to everybody who wants to use it, and then fix that. Like, they ship the Steam Deck and they keep updating it to make it better and better and better. They could do the same thing with SteamOS. Like, why do they have to wait until it's, pristine? So I don't know. Go ahead, Rich.
This came up during TGS, where Pierre Lou was interviewed by CNBC. I have some notes here. So he said, obviously, it's something we'd like to work with hardware manufacturers so that they can adopt SteamOS in the future. And this was, not but 1 week ago. But the thing is, they've said this before, right? Like, and I don't mean that these are empty promises from Valve. It just feels like when Bethesda announced Elder Scrolls 6 in 2018, right? Like, maybe you should have waited to talk about this because sure it'll happen, but we have no idea when it'll happen, and it feels like progress has been incredibly slow. So I'm personally getting a little impatient, but also I know they just dropped Counter-Strike 2. You mentioned that. They just dropped Steam VR 2. They just dropped SteamOS 3.5. So clearly they've got a lot on their hands. It's just my own personal opinion, my own personal feelings about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Half-Life 3 is right around the corner,
Russ.
Too.
Yeah, right.
Oh, come on. Why you gotta? Oh, that hurt. That hurt bad, Russ. Hey, everybody, that was a clip from the latest episode of the Nerd Nest podcast. If you enjoyed it, you might enjoy watching the entire episode, which I've got linked down below. If it's your first time here, please subscribe. And from the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.